Las Vegas, Nevada, a city of endless neon and impossible odds. Here, money moves faster than thought, through marble casinos where fortunes change with a single roll of dice. Behind the glamour, it also moves through beige service corridors, counting rooms, manager offices, and the most ignored places of all, employee break rooms. In those fluorescent-lit spaces stand silent machines, vending units selling sodas and snacks for a few dollars, unnoticed by millions. No one thought twice about who serviced them or how they worked. For nearly 3 years, that blind spot hid one of the most ingenious thefts in casino history. The quiet technician restocking those machines wasn't just collecting change. He was stealing millions. No violence, no hacking, no crew. Just patience, precision, and the perfect disguise, being invisible in plain sight. This is the story of the man who found the one weakness the world's most secure city forgot to guard. The ordinary. The story of the invisible thief. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. When federal agents finally arrested Derek Malone, 42, his booking photo showed a man built to be forgotten. Average height, graying hair, khakis, and a polo shirt. For nearly a decade, he'd made a living as a vending machine technician, a profession designed for invisibility. He learned early that people don't really see service workers. A man with a badge, clipboard, and dolly cart becomes part of the scenery. Guards nodded without looking. Managers held doors. Surveillance cameras followed gamblers, not him. By the time he secured casino contracts, Derek had mastered that invisibility. His background checks were spotless. His access badge opened service elevators, maintenance tunnels, break rooms, and even admin offices. He was reliable, polite, never late, never memorable. Casinos loved him because they never had to notice him. And while he restocked chips and candy, he was mapping the buildings, memorizing camera blind spots, shift rotations, and, most importantly, the hidden routes where cash moved between the floor and vaults. He waited, observing, blending, vanishing into routine. Until one day, a small detail changed everything. During a vending machine replacement in a third-floor break room, Derek spotted something odd. A newer reinforced wall, built differently from the rest. He knew that on the other side sat a cash holding zone, a temporary room where gaming chips and bills waited in safes before being transferred. Reviewing old blueprints, he realized the wall hid maintenance shafts, narrow conduits for wiring and air ducts, sealed and forgotten. They connected the low-security break rooms to high-security cash areas. Standing in that fluorescent-lit space, the smell of reheated food in the air, Derek understood what no one else had seen. The vending machines he serviced every week sat inches away from millions in cash, and through those walls ran the perfect, unnoticed path between them. Derek said nothing to the other technician. He finished the installation professionally, testing the new machine's refrigeration, ensuring all the coin mechanisms worked properly, cleaning up the cardboard and plastic wrapping from the replacement unit. But his mind was racing, running calculations that had nothing to do with proper vending machine installation. He was thinking about wall thickness, about access points, about the geometry of concealment. He was thinking about something that had never occurred to the casino's designers or security consultants. What if the vending machines themselves could be weaponized? Over the following weeks, Derek became obsessed with understanding the precise architecture of these liminal spaces. He studied every break room in every casino where he had contracts, paying special attention to those located adjacent to cash handling areas. He memorized wall compositions, noted which rooms had been constructed during which renovation phases, identified which spaces had the kind of infrastructure vulnerabilities he could exploit. He learned which casinos had updated security protocols and which still operated on decades-old systems designed before modern theft prevention technologies existed. The plan that emerged from his research was remarkable in its simplicity. Derek didn't need to break through walls or disable alarm systems or hack into computer networks. He didn't need to recruit accomplices or obtain specialized tools or develop elaborate cover stories. He just needed to modify his vending machines, the very equipment he was authorized and expected to service. Working in the warehouse where his vending company stored inventory and conducted repairs, Derek began experimenting with machine modifications that would seem innocent to casual inspection, but which created hidden spaces large enough to conceal substantial amounts of cash and chips. He removed unnecessary internal components, redundant structural supports, oversized refrigeration units that could be replaced with more compact models, bulky coin collection boxes that could be slimmed down. He reconfigured interior layouts, creating false backs and hidden compartments behind the racks that held candy bars and chip bags. To anyone opening the machine's front panel for routine maintenance, everything would look completely normal. But from the back, accessible only by removing several screws and a rear panel that required specialized tools, there existed a cavity large enough to hold multiple bricks of bundled cash. The modifications took months of careful work. Derek couldn't afford to make obvious changes that might alert his employer or casino management. Each altered machine had to function perfectly, dispensing products correctly, accepting payment without issues, maintaining proper refrigeration temperatures. The hidden compartments had to be seamlessly integrated, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and how to access them. He fabricated interior panels that matched the machine's original specifications, painted metal components to match factory colors, even replicated warning labels and serial number stickers to maintain authenticity. But the machines themselves were only part of the equation. Derek still needed a method to access the cash holding zones without triggering alarms or appearing in surveillance footage. This was where his months of observation paid off in ways that would make security professionals reconsider entire protocols. Derek had noticed that the small maintenance shafts passing through the reinforced walls, those 18-inch gaps designed for plumbing and electrical access, were sealed with removable panels on both sides. In theory, these panels were secured with specialized screws that would make unauthorized access obvious. In practice, Derek discovered that in several locations, these shafts had been accessed so infrequently over the years that the screws had been painted over multiple times, creating a seal that looked permanent but could actually be carefully broken and repaired without leaving obvious evidence. The geometry was challenging but possible. The shafts were narrow, but with careful maneuvering, Derek calculated that he could reach through from the break room side and access the interior of the holding zone, specifically the temporary safes where bundled cash and chips were stored during shift changes. These safes weren't the massive steel vaults you'd imagine. They were essentially reinforced cabinets, secured with electronic locks but not connected to central alarm systems because they were already inside a restricted, monitored area. The casino's security model assumed that if someone had access to the holding zones, they'd already passed through multiple layers of verification and surveillance. Derek had found the seam, the place where different security assumptions created an exploitable gap. The break rooms were monitored but casually because they were low-priority spaces where nothing valuable was kept. The holding zones were secured, but on the assumption that access was already tightly controlled. The vending machines were inspected for proper function, but nobody looked inside them for hidden compartments because that wasn't part of any security protocol. And the maintenance shafts were sealed but not alarmed because they were considered structural components rather than potential access points. Testing his theory required patience and nerve. During a legitimate service call, Derek carefully removed the painted-over screws securing the maintenance shaft panel in one break room, working during a shift change when the adjacent holding zone was temporarily unoccupied. The panel came away cleanly. Through the narrow shaft, he could see into the holding zone, could see the temporary safe with its electronic keypad, could see the bundles of cash visible through the safe's partially open door, where a supervisor had been in the process of organizing a deposit before being called away to handle a floor incident. Derek replaced the panel, carefully realigning the old screw holes and touching up the paint with a small bottle he'd brought specifically for this purpose. To anyone glancing at the wall, it would look undisturbed, just another sealed maintenance access that hadn't been opened in years. But Derek now knew the theory was sound. The plan wasn't just possible, it was practical. He spent 2 more months refining his approach, calculating timing, studying patterns, ensuring that every variable was accounted for. He installed his modified vending machines in strategic locations, always using legitimate work orders and proper procedures. He created maintenance schedules that gave him regular access during optimal hours. He prepared false invoicing systems that would explain why certain machines needed more frequent servicing than others. And then, on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m., when a shift change created a predictable gap in surveillance attention, and when he knew the holding zone adjacent to a third-floor break room would contain approximately $40,000 in bundled bills awaiting morning pickup, Derek Malone committed his first theft. The entire operation took less than 12 minutes. Nobody saw anything unusual. Nobody heard anything suspicious. A vending machine technician had entered an employee break room to service a refrigeration unit and had left carrying the same equipment card he'd arrived with. The money, vacuum sealed in plastic and compressed into compact bricks, now rested inside the modified compartment of his vending machine, hidden beneath racks of candy bars and potato chips. Derek rolled the cart past security checkpoints, exchanged polite nods with guards who'd seen him dozens of times before, and loaded the machine into his service van in the employee parking structure. He drove carefully, observing all traffic laws, arriving at his warehouse where he removed the cash and returned the machine to inventory rotation. $40,000, the equivalent of what he'd earned in an entire year of legitimate vending machine work. And Derek had taken it so cleanly, so invisibly, that the casino wouldn't even realize money was missing until the next day's reconciliation. And even then, they'd likely suspect an accounting error or internal theft by authorized personnel before they'd imagine the vending machine guy. Derek had crossed the line from observation to action. The discovery phase was over. The execution had begun. And he was about to spend the next 3 years proving that the most effective thefts aren't those that overcome security. They're those that work within it, invisible until the very moment they're finally understood. Over the next 33 months, Derek Malone would execute the most methodical casino theft in modern history, a crime distinguished not by its audacity or violence, but by its patience and precision. This wasn't a smash-and-grab operation or an elaborate heist coordinated in a single night. This was something far more insidious, systematic, invisible extraction that would ultimately total nearly $20 million before anyone realized they'd been robbed. Derek established a rhythm, a careful pattern that balanced opportunity against risk. He never hit the same location twice within a 3-week period. He varied his timing, sometimes working during pre-dawn hours when staff was minimal, other times striking during shift changes when attention was divided and routines disrupted. He rotated between 5 different casino properties where he held legitimate service contracts, ensuring that no single location would detect a pattern in their losses. Most crucially, Derek never took more than could be explained as accounting discrepancy or internal theft by authorized personnel. The amounts varied depending on opportunity and his assessment of risk. Sometimes $40,000, other times $70,000 or $90,000. Once, during a particularly lucrative weekend when a major boxing match had drawn high rollers and the temporary holding safes contained unusually large reserves, Derek extracted nearly $200,000 in a single operation. But he immediately pulled back, not hitting any location for over a month afterward, understanding that greed was where most criminals failed. The key wasn't maximizing each theft. It was maintaining invisibility over time. His method remained remarkably consistent, refined through repetition into an almost choreographed routine. Derek would arrive for a legitimate service call, documented in advance through proper work order systems. He'd park in the employee structure, check in with security using his authorized vendor badge, and proceed to the designated location with his dolly cart loaded with whatever supplies the work order specified. Beverage inventory, snack refills, repair parts for malfunctioning machines. The timing was everything. Derek had identified precise windows when surveillance attention was predictably diverted elsewhere. Shift changes created reliable chaos. Security supervisors conducting handoff briefings, guards temporarily reassigned to escort departing employees through cash-out procedures, surveillance operators focusing on gaming floors where the highest value targets existed. Between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., when casino traffic was lowest and exhaustion affected even the most dedicated security personnel, these gaps became most pronounced. Once inside the break room, Derek would begin with legitimate work, actually servicing the vending machine, replacing inventory, collecting coins, performing whatever maintenance the work order specified. This served dual purposes, providing cover for his presence and ensuring that the machines continued functioning normally, preventing any reason for replacement or additional scrutiny. He'd take his time, working methodically, occasionally pausing as if troubleshooting a mechanical issue. Then, during moments when the break room was empty and hallway cameras were angled away, Derek would shift to his actual purpose. Working quickly but without obvious haste, he'd remove the maintenance shaft panel he'd already loosened during previous visits, its screws now easily accessible despite appearing painted shut to casual inspection. The narrow shaft provided just enough space for Derek to reach through with a telescoping tool he'd fabricated specifically for this purpose. A modified retrieval device inspired by those used by automotive locksmiths, capable of manipulating objects at a distance. The temporary safes in the holding zones weren't designed to resist this kind of attack because nobody had imagined it was possible. They secured against someone physically entering the room and attempting to force the safe open, but not against someone accessing the interior through an adjacent space via an architectural feature nobody had considered a vulnerability. Derek had learned through patient observation that supervisors often left these safes partially open during active operations, loading or reorganizing contents between collection rounds. The safes weren't meant to secure money against sophisticated theft. They were just temporary containers in an already secure room. Using his custom tool, Derek would reach through the shaft, carefully extract bundled cash or chip containers from the safe's interior, and pull them back through the narrow opening. The entire operation took between 6 and 12 minutes, depending on how much cash was accessible and how it was bundled. He worked by feel as much as sight, having practiced the movements dozens of times with dummy setups in his warehouse. Every motion was economical, precise, the result of repetition and planning. The extracted money would be immediately vacuum sealed using a handheld device Derek carried in his toolkit, compressed into compact bricks that could fit within the hidden compartments of his modified vending machines. He'd then replace the maintenance shaft panel, carefully realigning it so the painted-over screws appeared undisturbed, using touch-up paint to restore the illusion of a seal that hadn't been broken in years. The entire process left almost no evidence. No forced doors, no triggered alarms, no obvious signs of entry. Derek would then return to legitimate maintenance work, completing whatever the work order specified, ensuring the vending machine functioned properly. He'd pack up his tools, dispose of any trash and break room receptacles, and prepare to leave. The vacuum-sealed bricks of cash would be placed inside the hidden compartments of his vending machine, inaccessible without removing the rear panel using specialized tools. From the outside, the machine looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a standard vending unit being transported for restocking or repair. Exiting was where many thieves would have failed, where nervousness might have created suspicious behavior that alert security personnel could detect. But Derek had spent years moving through these buildings, had passed these same security checkpoints hundreds of times, had established himself as such routine presence that guards barely glance at him anymore. He'd exchange the same polite nods, occasionally make small talk about sports or weather, maintain the persona of the forgettable technician just doing his job. His cart would roll past metal detectors designed to catch weapons, past security stations with monitors displaying feeds from dozens of cameras, past managers' offices and surveillance control rooms. The vending machine, that unremarkable piece of equipment that everyone had seen him transport countless times before, contained hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen cash. But nobody looked inside. Nobody questioned the vendor guy. Nobody saw him as anything other than part of the casino's operational background. Once outside, Derek would load the machine into his service van with the same unhurried efficiency he displayed entering. He'd drive away observing all traffic laws, taking routes that varied to avoid pattern recognition, eventually arriving at his warehouse facility where he'd unload the machine and extract the stolen cash in complete privacy. The money would then be transported to his home in Henderson, a quiet suburb southeast of the Strip, where he'd lived for 6 years in a modest single-story house that attracted absolutely no attention from neighbors. In his garage, beneath a workbench that appeared to be used for normal DIY projects, Derek had carefully removed a section of the concrete floor and created a hidden compartment. The void beneath extended several feet deep and wide, lined with plastic sheeting to prevent moisture damage, and could be sealed with a concrete patch that, once cured, was virtually indistinguishable from the surrounding floor. Here Derek stored his accumulating fortune in vacuum-sealed bricks, carefully organized and documented in a ledger he kept in encrypted files on a laptop that never connected to the internet. The stolen casino chips presented a different challenge. Derek couldn't simply spend them without creating traceable patterns that might alert casino security to watch for redemption activity. Instead, he developed a patient approach to laundering them through small, irregular cash-outs. He'd visit different casinos on different days, never redeeming more than a few $1,000s worth at a time, mixing in genuine gambling activity to create cover. He'd lose a few hundred here, win a few hundred there, gradually converting stolen chips to clean cash over weeks and months. It was inefficient, but it was safe. Derek's discipline was extraordinary. Despite having access to millions, he maintained his modest lifestyle, continued working his regular routes, paid his taxes on his legitimate vending income. He drove the same 8-year-old Toyota Tacoma. He lived in the same unremarkable house. He bought groceries at the same discount supermarket. The money accumulating beneath his garage floor remained exactly that, accumulated. He didn't buy luxury cars or take expensive vacations or make any of the conspicuous purchases that draw attention to sudden wealth. In many ways, Derek treated his criminal activity with the same methodical patience he'd applied to his legitimate work. This wasn't about quick money or lifestyle transformation. This was about executing a plan perfectly, about proving to himself that he could do what others hadn't imagined possible. The theft itself became almost mechanical, a problem he'd solved that he was now solving repeatedly, each iteration refining his technique slightly. By the 18-month mark, Derek had stolen approximately $8 million. By 2 years, that figure had climbed past $12 million. The casinos remained oblivious, their losses dispersed across multiple properties in dozens of accounting periods, never quite large enough to trigger major investigations, always explainable through the normal variances that exist in operations handling billions in annual cash flow. Derek became more confident but never careless. He continued his reconnaissance, continued refining his understanding of security patterns, continued maintaining the invisible profile that made him forgettable. He added 6th and 7th casino contracts, expanding his operational territory. He invested time in studying new properties, identifying which ones had exploitable breakroom configurations, which security systems had gaps, which management teams were less attentive to minor discrepancies. The operation had evolved into something almost sustainable, a criminal enterprise that could theoretically continue indefinitely as long as Derek maintained discipline, and the casinos never realized they were being systematically robbed. He'd found the perfect crime, or as close to perfect as exists in reality. Exploitation of structural vulnerabilities nobody had imagined needed protection, executed by someone whose very presence was designed to be forgotten. For nearly 3 years, Derek Malone moved like a ghost through Las Vegas's most sophisticated security infrastructure, stealing millions while being watched by thousands of cameras, passing dozens of guards, working inside buildings specifically designed to prevent exactly what he was doing. And every time he rolled his cart past another checkpoint, waved to another security guard, disappeared back into the desert night with another vacuum-sealed brick of casino cash hidden inside his vending machine, he proved something that security professionals have always known but struggle to defend against. The most dangerous criminals aren't those who fight the system, they're those who become part of it. Derek Malone's perfect crime began to unravel in the most mundane way imaginable, not through sophisticated forensic investigation or brilliant detective work, but through corporate restructuring and the kind of random operational change that happens thousands of times daily in large organizations. One of the casino properties where Derek had been operating for over 2 years decided to terminate their contract with the vending services company Derek worked for. This wasn't unusual in itself. Casinos regularly rebid service contracts to reduce costs or improve terms, but the timing, which Derek couldn't have predicted or controlled, proved catastrophic. The new vending company taking over the contract sent their technicians to assess the existing machines and determine which units should remain, which needed replacing, and what inventory systems they'd be inheriting. On a Thursday morning in late autumn, a technician named Robert Chen began his walkthrough of the casino's employee areas, documenting machine placements and conditions. Robert had worked in vending services for 15 years and prided himself on thorough evaluations. When he reached the third-floor break room, the same location where Derek had made dozens of extractions, Robert noticed something that struck him as unusual. The vending machine, while appearing normal from the front, seemed heavier than comparable models. Not dramatically so, but enough that Robert, who'd moved thousands of these machines in his career, registered the difference. His curiosity piqued, Robert decided to conduct a full inspection. He opened the front panel, checking coin mechanisms and product racks. Everything looked standard. But then he removed the rear access panel, something most cursory inspections wouldn't include, and saw modifications that immediately alarmed him. The interior configuration didn't match any factory specification he recognized. There were custom panels, spaces that shouldn't exist, wiring modifications that served no apparent functional purpose. Robert photographed everything with his phone and immediately contacted his supervisor. Within hours, the casino's director of security was examining the machine personally. What they found, once they carefully disassembled the unit, was a sophisticated hidden compartment, empty at the time, but clearly designed to conceal objects. The modifications were professional grade, seamlessly integrated, the work of someone who understood vending machine construction intimately. The security director's first assumption was employee theft, that someone had modified the machine to smuggle personal items or perhaps stolen casino property out of the building. But then someone asked the obvious question, who had access to modify the machine in the first place? Who serviced these units? The answer came back quickly. Derek Malone, the previous vendor's technician who'd been servicing that location for over 2 years. A more detailed inspection revealed 4 additional modified machines in other break rooms throughout that casino. Each modification was slightly different, adapted to the specific machine model, but all shared the same purpose, creating hidden storage space invisible to casual inspection. The discovery triggered immediate alarm. If these machines were designed to smuggle items out of the casino, what had been smuggled, and how much? The casino initiated an internal audit, cross-referencing their loss prevention data with Derek's service schedule. The results were disturbing. Over the past 24 months at that single property, they'd recorded numerous instances of cash discrepancies in amounts ranging from $30,000 to $90,000. Variances that had been investigated as potential internal theft or accounting errors, but never definitively resolved. When they plotted those discrepancies against dates and times, a pattern emerged. Nearly every significant unexplained loss occurred within 24 hours of one of Derek's scheduled service visits. The casino contacted law enforcement. FBI agents specializing in interstate theft and organized crime became involved. Federal jurisdiction triggered by the amounts involved and the interstate nature of casino operations. When investigators began examining Derek's work history, they realized the implications extended far beyond a single property. Derek held or had recently held contracts with 7 different Las Vegas casinos. If he'd been running the same operation across all of them, the FBI executed a rapid, coordinated investigation. They obtained Derek's complete work schedules from his vending company, cross-referenced them with loss reports from every casino where he'd had access, and discovered a correlation that was statistically impossible to explain as coincidence. Across 5 different properties, unexplained cash discrepancies totaling approximately $19 million had occurred during the 3-year period Derek had been working as a vendor, and virtually every discrepancy aligned temporally with his documented presence in the building. Surveillance footage review became the next priority. FBI analysts began the tedious work of examining archived security camera footage from multiple casinos, focusing on the hours around documented losses. They faced challenges immediately. Casinos generate enormous amounts of video data, most of which is overwritten after 30 to 90 days, unless specifically flagged for retention. Much of the relevant footage from earlier thefts no longer existed, but enough remained to establish Derek's pattern. Investigators found dozens of instances showing Derek entering employee areas with his cart, spending longer than expected in break rooms, exiting with the same cart. Nothing in the footage looked overtly suspicious. He was always exactly where he was supposed to be, doing apparently legitimate work. But the correlation was undeniable. Every time they found footage of Derek in a specific area during a specific time window, that location subsequently reported cash discrepancies. The most revealing discovery came when analysts synchronized footage from multiple cameras covering Derek's typical entry and exit routes. Advanced facial recognition and gait analysis software, tools that had become standard in federal investigations, allowed them to track his movements frame by frame across different camera angles. What emerged was a heat map showing that Derek appeared in every affected property during the optimal timing windows, always accessing break rooms adjacent to cash handling areas, always between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. when surveillance attention was divided. But security footage, while suggestive, wasn't enough for a conviction. The FBI needed physical evidence: the stolen money, the modified machines, documentation that would prove intent and execution. They obtained warrants for Derek's home, his warehouse, his vehicle, and his financial records. On a Wednesday morning, multiple teams executed those warrants simultaneously, a coordinated operation designed to prevent Derek from destroying evidence if he learned of the investigation. Agents arrived at Derek's modest Henderson home just after dawn, timing their arrival for when he'd typically be asleep after working his overnight vendor routes. They found Derek having coffee in his kitchen, reading news on his tablet, looking for all the world like a tired middle-aged man preparing for another day of routine work. His surprise at seeing federal agents at his door appeared genuine, but experienced investigators knew that reaction could be performance. The search of his house initially revealed nothing incriminating. Derek's lifestyle matched his legitimate income. Modest furnishings, no obvious luxuries, nothing suggesting sudden wealth. His computer contained work schedules, inventory spreadsheets, vendor accounts, all consistent with his cover identity. But when agents moved to the garage, they noticed something that more casual observers might have missed. The concrete floor showed subtle variations in color and texture, patches that appeared newer than surrounding areas, carefully blended but not quite perfect matches under close inspection. Bringing in ground-penetrating radar equipment, agents identified a void beneath the garage floor. When they carefully excavated, removing the concrete patch Derek had installed, they uncovered his treasury: vacuum-sealed bricks of cash, organized by date and amount, stacked in plastic containers designed to prevent moisture damage. The bills were still bound in casino bank wrappers, still organized in the bundles exactly as they'd been when Derek extracted them from temporary holding safes. The count would eventually total $7.4 million. Money Derek had never spent, had simply accumulated like a monument to his own cleverness. The warehouse search proved equally productive. Among the legitimate vending machine inventory, investigators found 5 more modified units with hidden compartments. In a storage area Derek had rented under his business account, agents discovered an additional $3.6 million in vacuum-sealed cash, along with approximately $800,000 in casino chips from various properties. They also found Derek's tools, the custom retrieval device he'd used to extract money through maintenance shafts, the vacuum sealer, touch-up paint in multiple colors, spare panels and components for machine modifications. Perhaps most damning was the encrypted laptop, which digital forensics specialists eventually cracked, revealing detailed records of every theft. Derek had documented everything: dates, amounts, locations, methods, even notes about security patterns and timing optimizations. In a folder labeled simply Work Notes, investigators found what amounted to a complete confession: spreadsheets tracking nearly $20 million in thefts across 5 casinos over 33 months, technical diagrams showing his machine modifications, detailed floor plans of casino employee areas with security camera blind spots marked in red, and even a ledger comparing his theft amounts to his legitimate vending income. The documentation revealed something psychologists would later find fascinating. Derek hadn't kept these records for practical criminal purposes. He wasn't tracking the money to launder it or planning to spend it systematically. The records existed because Derek was fundamentally someone who documented his work. Just as he'd meticulously tracked vending machine inventory and maintenance schedules for years, he'd applied the same methodical approach to his criminal enterprise. The theft itself had become a kind of project, something he managed with spreadsheets and optimization notes, constantly refining his technique the way a craftsman perfects his trade. Financial investigation revealed Derek's discipline extended beyond the physical crime. Despite stealing nearly $20 million, his banking records showed no suspicious activity whatsoever. He deposited his legitimate paychecks, paid his bills on time, filed accurate tax returns on his vendor income. He hadn't made any large purchases, hadn't transferred money to offshore accounts, hadn't engaged in any of the typical money laundering activities investigators usually see in theft cases of this magnitude. The man had stolen a fortune and then simply sat on it, buried it under concrete, and vacuum sealed it in warehouses like some modern-day pirate hoarding treasure he'd never spent. As federal prosecutors built their case, they uncovered details that made the scope of Derek's operation even more remarkable. Surveillance footage analysis eventually documented him making over 150 separate extractions across 5 different properties. Casino audits, once they knew specifically what to look for and when, identified total losses of $19.8 million, though they acknowledged some earlier thefts might have gone completely unrecorded if the losses had been absorbed into normal accounting variance margins. The modified vending machines represented sophisticated engineering. Forensic examination revealed Derek had spent hundreds of hours perfecting the modifications, creating compartments that were structurally sound, properly weight-balanced to avoid suspicion, and completely invisible without disassembly. He'd matched paint colors precisely, replicated manufacturer labels, even artificially aged new components so they'd blend with older parts. The level of craftsmanship suggested someone who took genuine pride in the quality of his work, even when that work was fundamentally criminal. Investigation of the maintenance shafts confirmed Derek's access method. In break rooms where he'd operated, technicians found the wall panels showed evidence of repeated careful removal and replacement. The painted-over screws Derek had manipulated bore microscopic tool marks consistent with regular access. Touch-up paint analysis revealed multiple applications over time, suggesting Derek had refined his technique through practice. The architectural vulnerability he'd exploited was real and had existed for years. Derek had simply been the first person to recognize it and understand how it could be weaponized. Interviews with casino security personnel painted a picture of how completely Derek had integrated himself into the operational landscape. Guards remembered him as that vending guy, but couldn't provide detailed descriptions beyond the basics. Managers confirmed he'd been reliable, professional, never gave anyone reason for concern. Surveillance operators, when shown footage of Derek moving through their buildings, admitted they'd probably watched him dozens of times without registering his presence as anything worth noting. He'd achieved perfect camouflage not through disguise, but through absolute normalcy. The FBI investigation also revealed how close Derek had come to continuing indefinitely. Had the casino not switched vendors, had Robert Chen not been the particularly thorough technician who noticed the weight discrepancy, Derek might have continued his operation for years more. The casinos weren't systematically looking for this type of theft because it existed outside their threat models. Their security infrastructure was designed to catch card counters, collusion between dealers and players, organized fraud rings, digital hacking attempts. They'd never imagined someone would exploit vending machine access to systematically rob temporary holding areas through architectural vulnerabilities. Derek's arrest made national news, though not with the sensational coverage typical of major heists. The story was almost too mundane, a vending machine technician stealing money through patient, methodical extraction rather than dramatic confrontation. But within law enforcement and security circles, the case became a landmark study in how systematic exploitation of trust and routine access could defeat even sophisticated security systems. In federal court, Derek Malone looked as ordinary as ever. Khakis, polo shirt, quiet composure. For 3 years, that forgettable demeanor had been his best disguise as he stole $19.8 million from Las Vegas casinos. The evidence was overwhelming. Stolen cash, modified vending machines, handwritten logs, surveillance footage, bank records. His lawyer told him trial was pointless, so Derek pled guilty and fully cooperated, even guiding FBI agents through his methods. He didn't beg for mercy. During sentencing, he spoke not of guilt, but of craft, how he'd found flaws no one else had. His one unforgettable line, I didn't break in. I just used the holes they left open. It summed up everything: his calm genius, his lack of remorse, and his understanding that the best way to defeat security was to blend into it. The judge struggled to define him. No violence, no accomplices, yet one of the largest casino thefts in U.S. history. Derek got 22 years in federal prison. At 43, that meant freedom, if ever, in his 60s. 11 million was recovered. The rest vanished. The casino stayed silent. Better to absorb the loss than admit the system had failed. Behind closed doors, the industry panicked. Derek's scheme exposed blind spots nobody had imagined. Casinos spent nearly $50 million on redesigns, sealing maintenance shafts, relocating cash rooms, inspecting vending machines, and rewriting vendor contracts. From then on, service staff worked in pairs under supervision. The idea that low-risk employees could cause high-impact thefts changed security forever. Experts studying Derek's psychology found his motive wasn't greed, but mastery. The crime was his art form, a test of intellect and patience. He'd stolen slowly, methodically, always under investigation thresholds. Had his contract not changed, he might never have been caught. His employer collapsed under lawsuits. Vending companies faced new scrutiny and expensive oversight. Meanwhile, in prison, Derek remained disciplined and unremarkable. Just another inmate, except for the legend attached to his name. In security circles, his case became required study. The Malone methodology entered textbooks. Exploit legitimate access, stay invisible, steal small and often. To casinos, it was a humbling reminder that no system is airtight. One quiet man with keys and curiosity had done what syndicates and hackers never could: make the house lose. Asked years later if he regretted it, Derek gave his usual measured reply. He regretted losing his freedom, not his achievement. It was perfect, he said, until it wasn't.